Hey guys, Corey, Faymus Media. Just when you thought the Nikon D500 was the best focusing Nikon ever made, now we have the D5. The Nikon D5 is just brilliant. But first, before we get into the review, I just want to point out that I was being kind of facetious in the Nikon D500 video about the XQD slots. I know that's the way of the future. I was just making a point, kind of dry sense of humor on it, that you got the XQD slots in that camera and the D4, D4S, and now the D5, but nothing else. So you got to have two sets of cards if you have, say, a D800 or a D700. So I was just being facetious, didn't mean anything by it. I kind of don't like change sometimes, but then again, change is good. They are fantastic cards. I do have an XQD card in this, obviously, and it's fantastic. The Nikon D5 has got much better low light performance, at least from what I've seen. Let's start off with the facts. X-Speed 5 processor, 20.8 megapixel, full frame. Of course, this is going to be great in low light. It's full frame. However, this has got 153 autofocusing points, 99 which are cross type. 55 of them are selectable. However, if you put a teleconverter or a super telephoto lens on here and you're shooting at f8, or you're stopping down even further, you're only going to get 15 autofocusing points and only 9 of them are going to be selectable. You get the full selectable range and 153 autofocusing points if you're shooting at f5.6 or faster. So it's got a 3.2-inch screen in the back, 2.36 million dot, but there's something different about this camera. And do you know what that is? That's right, it's a touch screen. This camera is absolutely brilliant. When you're trying to punch in to check focus, instead of using the D-pad in the back to trying to scroll around and find your focusing points and see noise or whatever you're trying to look for, you can just pinch in like an iPhone or any smartphone, and you can scroll through your images with a swipe. It is brilliant. This camera is just amazing. Now, we're on to a really good point here. So now moving on to something really important that everyone's gonna be very happy about. The D5 had a limitation of 3 minutes for 4K video, but the D500 didn't. It had to do with something with firmware, and Nikon had to get the camera out and do the update for the firmware for that. It has been released. If you didn't know that, you can now get 30 minutes of 4K recording in the D5. The great thing about the D5 though is that you get 1.5 crop with 4K, so no pixel binning. That's a discussion for another day, but you don't want to have a full frame sensor shooting 4K. The sensor's too big and you're losing data. It causes macro blocking, all kinds of stuff. This actually crops out to 1.5, giving you an accurate portion of the sensor for true 4K. You can also record 1080p in the 1.5 crop or the 3 times crop, which would be the fully accurate, resolution for 1080p. So I recommend shooting in 3 times crop depending on what you're doing, but you can also shoot the full frame or 1.5 crop. Most people who shoot on the D5 are going to be shooting 4K anyway. So now another thing about this camera, it does have the same focusing system as the D500, but this will do 3.2 million ISO. That's right, 3,280,000 ISO. Don't expect to get usable images beyond 409,000 ISO. It's going to be about the limit of this camera for usability, even at the brink, at the edge of usability. I would say as long as you're below 102,000, everything's going to be very usable. It's a great camera. It's better than the D4S, but we're going to really put it through its paces and compare it to the D500 because I'm going to be comparing the low light video and photo to that as well to see how much better this truly is. And next week, we're going to be comparing the D5 to the 1DX Mark II. That's going to be fantastic. But the only thing this camera doesn't truly do that I wish it did is 60 frames in 4K that the 1DX Mark II does. But we got the limitation removed. We get the full 30 minutes. The camera is fantastic. I want to talk about one more thing before we get started, and that's the 3D tracking, which uses the 153 phase detection points to basically track moving color and subjects. You also have group function. If you don't know what that is, the group function, instead of putting one autofocusing point somewhere across your range, it gives you a group so that if something you're tracking moves away from that autofocusing point, you have the group setting that will adjust it you know, to focus better on whatever's moving across the screen. Group function is really, really good on the D5. 12 frames a second burst, 14 with the mirror locked up, and with the XQD card, 200 shots in burst without having to worry about a buffer filling up. It's going to be able to put those images to the card as fast as the D5 can shoot them. You're going to be able to shoot like crazy with this camera. You're going to be filling cards like crazy. Cards are going to be full all the time. In fact, I think my card's probably half full. I'm going to have to delete some space on it. But anyway, let's get to shooting, guys. So we're going to hit the streets. I'm going to be testing out the 24-70 and also the 70-200 and try to get my 50mm prime on there and just work the camera. We're going to do some video photos. Have a great time. And Ray's on the video camera again. We're going to bother him and maybe take some photos of him. He's been dipping around the camera lately. But let's put the camera to work. There's no denying that this camera truly feels better in the hands than pretty much any Nikon ever released. In fact, it's a little bit better than the D4. It just feels a little bit different. Although they're pretty much almost identical, it just feels like the grip is a little bit more recessed. It just fits a little bit better. They've changed the area of the thumb grip for shooting vertical. It's just really a much more refined camera than any other camera that Nikon has. It's just really brilliant. Here I go walking in the streets again. I'm always walking in the streets. Gonna put the continuous focus to work. It just tracks so beautifully. The camera is fantastic. Let's put the burst to work here. And it just tracks. Every shot is in focus. If you're looking to upgrade to a professional camera, look past the D4 and the D4S because the D5 is truly worth the extra money. Newest technology, X-Speed 5 processor, just marvelous camera. This guy's holding a snake, and I'm not so sure if I could do that. I mean, I can hold cameras all day, but I'm not so sure about a snake. Does it scare you? I feel like that's just gonna kill me right now, and then Ray's gonna steal all my equipment. That's so scary. Oh my God. That is crazy. So if you guys are watching this, you're probably not having a good time. If you're scared of snakes, it's probably the worst video you've ever seen. It's just... I'm glad I'm holding the camera, not the snake. We should give the snake to Ray. You want it, Ray, right? And it has a touch screen, so like I can just zoom in and kind of just check my focus. You'd have to zoom in with the magnifying glass and move around with the joystick here. However, as you can see how slow that is, I can just pinch to zoom and done. So the touch screen is absolutely brilliant. Another thing to note, they did move the beat, which is the beat to confirm single point focus. They moved that to the setup menu and out of the shooting menu. Not so sure when that happened, but the camera feels about the same weight as the D. It's never a boring day in Manhattan. Ever. So, if you're asking yourself, is this the best camera with the fastest autofocusing system? And just in a straight question, is this the best DSLR ever made? Well, for the money, it is the most expensive. It's more than the 1DX Mark II, which I haven't used yet, but besides the 1DX Mark II, this is the best DSLR ever made. It actually is. It's better than the D500 in a few ways. The fact that it's full frame and better in low light, has the same brilliant autofocusing system, and a bunch of other nifty features that only the D5 could handle. So, if you have the budget for it, this really is the best DSLR. And if you're shooting Nikon, it truly is the best DSLR they've ever released. But I am going to be putting it head to head with the 1DX Mark II. Makes you think. Things just keep getting better and better and better and better. Pretty soon we're going to have 3 trillion ISO. There was a video I did a couple of years ago. I said maybe one day we'll come around that we'll get 1 million ISO. Well, now we have 3.2 million ISO. And Nikon's just trying to show off, because anything over 409,000 is kind of worse than an iPhone. In a dark black hole, and you're going to need a forensic technician, magnifying glasses, and all kinds of technology to find any usable trace of an actual image. So stay clear of anything north of 409,000 ISO. I like how you can set the AF on when shooting vertical. You got the information button when you're shooting video, which we'll get into in just a little bit. Fantastic, your exposure on the top for when you're using aperture priority. Everything is just accessible. It's great. They even changed the front of the PC hot shoe cover, which is much better cover. It doesn't pop off as easy as the D4 or the D4S. I really like that. The lock is brilliant. It seems a little bit stronger than the D4, the D4S. Overall, just much better build quality. So the D5, you just pinch these 2 buttons here and you can take the round eye cup right off if you plan on putting a Hoodman eye cup or something. It's just great. It truly is great. The diopter adjustment is just fantastic. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in, group. Using the group function right now. Now this camera will be sensitive on all 153 autofocus points up to -3 EV. If you're using the central autofocusing point, you'll get up to -4 EV for low contrast situations or really, really dark rooms, environments like that. I feel like I could just shoot anything, just like with the D500. I could point it, half press the shutter, it'll focus, and it's a done deal. Everything's in focus. Just great. So great. Did I say it was great? I want to keep this. I really do. I think I might get me a D5. Oh, I like the D500 too, but I shoot a lot of video and photo, and full frame is always great. If you've got the budget for it, you smell that? No, not the New York City air, the D5 air. The camera's so great, it's putting oxygen out into the environment. I can smell the goodness of the D5. So right now I've got an HDR, high dynamic range, which is only good for JPEG, but you're not gonna have to do much more than color or contrast correction, because highlights and shadows are brilliant if you get it properly the first time. So the viewfinder is 100% coverage, of course. The battery lasts so long, you can get 3,780 actuations out of it. 400,000 is the shutter count that they've been tested to last. So this is gonna be with you for a very long time. And 3,780 photos before the battery dies. That's a lot. That's like 2 or 3 days of shooting, at least 2 full wedding days that I can get out of the D4, the D4S. If you're shooting video, you should be able to get several hours, 3-4 hours or more. The batteries are great. 2 batteries will get you through an entire day no matter what you're doing. Very, very good batteries. The ENL 18A is just flawless. The joysticks on the back, or little thumbsticks from the D4. D4S and D5 have different grips. They don't come off, whereas the D4, they did. Not that I had that problem, but many people had issues with it. You know, For a moment here, I was starting to think that Ray hasn't had a shower in a very long time. I'm smelling like this weird foul smell. I know it can't be the D5 that's giving off that kind of a smell, because the D5 puts oxygen into the environment. Didn't you know that? I'm standing beside about 300 pounds of trash. I just can't smell the trash as much as the normal person could, because the D5 is putting fresh air back into the environment. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but it's the goodness. The goodness of the D5. One of the reasons why I've always preferred shooting Nikon is because of the auto-focusing button on the side. Switching between continuous and single is pretty easy. I'm gonna get run over by a car. I'm always standing in the road. It's a bad habit. And just gotta love that touch screen. I can just flip through photos. It makes it so easy. I can check focus on any shot. It's so easy. It's just a breeze. Just for fun, we'll shoot an image out here at 6400 ISO. I know Ray's probably thinking it's ridiculous. Middle of the daytime, 6400 ISO. Just to see what it looks like. See how clean this image is. 6400 ISO right there. Well, that's great. How does it shoot people? Well, let's find out. 6400 ISO, let's take a look. I'm gonna pinch in, and at 6400 ISO, this camera is about the equivalent of the D810 at about maybe 640 to 800. It's brilliant. You could never really be worried about low light with the D5. I mean, you could be in a black hole and still shoot with it. Although we gotta get away from this trash. I don't know why we're still here. It's like the trash is sucking us in. They always say that positive attracts the negative. I guess the camera's so great, the trash sucks so bad that they're sticking together. We're still here, and I don't know why. Someone should really clean this mess up. You know what this really looks like? When they made the video game The Division, I'm sure a lot of you guys have played The Division, the whole city was covered in trash. I mean, it's really not that bad, but I mean, if you look, it looks just like The Division. There's trash everywhere. We're gonna shoot at 25,600 ISO, just for the heck of it. I've maxed out my shutter at 8,000. This camera. $25,600 on the streets. I don't even know why I'm doing this. It's like I'm so confident and cocky with the low light. So I have the 70-200 on now. We can really get close to the subjects without actually having to be close. That woman just flicked me off, or she was just being cool for the camera. I can't decide yet. I like that.
You don't get the finger, you're not in New York.
If you didn't hear what she said if you don't get the finger, it means you're not really in New York. Never got to test the D500 with this lens. So some people might say that the 70-200, the D5 is overkill. But I don't know, I think it's great. New York has so much culture. There's so much art here. It's very, very fun to be here and to be able to document this and just be able to walk the streets and take photos of all the culture and the music and the different art that we have. And Union Square is really a great place for that. Cute little doggy. I think the dog just wants to take the spotlight in the video. I think he's trying to do the video for me. I'm being upstaged by a dog. He can probably smell my dog. I have a dog too, so yeah. Are you having a good time in the park? Do you want to shoot some photos with me? Or he just loves Ray. Maybe he likes Ray. Everybody loves Ray. So now it's time, what everybody's been waiting for. Time to test the 4K on the D5. With the limitation of 3 minutes being removed, getting the full 30 minutes like every other DSLR, except way better in low light, better dynamic range, and of course, internal 4K up to 30 frames a second. Let's test it. So it's a good thing they fixed the limitation of 3 minutes, because if this camera, as great as it is, was limited to 3 minutes, it would stink really bad. In fact, it would almost smell like the trash that we were standing by earlier, making the camera almost pointless to shoot video. So the fact that they did fix this makes the camera just a must-have for anybody who's shooting photo and video and wants to use just one body, and wants fantastic color, dynamic range, and just overall great, juicy, hearty video. Switching over to video right now. ISO 200, we're gonna go to flat. Autofocusing, I'm gonna put to manual. You can touch your autofocus points on the screen now, it's great. Another great thing about this camera is you press the information button right there, a little eye, and you can adjust your microphone settings and all kinds of different stuff. Wind noise reduction, destination monitor brightness, highlight display, headphone volume, all kinds of stuff. It's great.
Never telling you you're a good
Dynamic range is really good for a DSLR. As good or better than any of the other Nikons in the lineup, but it being 4K, and you're not gonna have very much macro blocking or pixel binning due to the 1.5 crop. Gonna take it out of flat and go to portrait and do some video up close and just check out the colors and contrast. Perfect spot to do some video. Wedding videographers will love that. It'll track people coming down the aisle, dancing on the dance floor. You don't have to worry about checking your focus all the time. It's really that good. And it tracks smart. It knows to stay on the subject that I'm focusing on and not the background. And someone just walked in front of the camera and it stayed focused on the subject. Let's not forget another thing that makes this camera so great. Is this a machine gun? So, that right there was a major 200 photo burst. Just insane. Could never miss a shot. It's almost too fast. There's nothing we could do on the street that would take advantage of 12 frames a second with this much autofocusing power. It's like I'm empowered with autofocusing and frames per second. 200 photos in a burst, 12 frames a second. 153 autofocusing points, 99 cross type. I can focus on anything instantly, never have an out of focus shot. But we're just walking the streets. So it renders it useless, almost like a Ferrari in New York City traffic. Doesn't make much sense. I'm not saying that the camera's not great, but you know, can I really find a way to use this power on the streets? So it truly deserves another view. All the buttons are relatively the same as the D4, D4S, but the touchscreen is really where it's at. As you can see, instead of pressing this button to zoom in and using the D-pad, you see how slow it is. It's like the old method. Now the new method, you zoom in, done. You can go in between images like that, or you can zoom out and swipe. The touchscreen is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the things that make the D5 so amazing. Just one of those added features that you just can't live without.
So now it's time for the low light test, and of course anything below 6400 ISO is pretty much pointless, but we're going to do it anyway. And we're going to go through 400, 800, and 1600 ISO, and you're going to see how well this camera truly does perform in low light. Once we move along to 3200 ISO, you can see the image still retains all detail. There's absolutely no visible noise that you can see. And by the time we move along to 6400 ISO, you can start to see small trace amounts of noise in the shadows, but it's still very hard to tell. At 12,800, you can see a little bit of green in the whites and a little bit of pink in the blacks. A little bit of color correction will take care of that. It gets a little bit worse, and now the noise we start to see at 25,600, although there's really not much of it. Even at 51,200, the noise is not the problem. It's the color degradation in the shadows and highlights. At 102,400, the image is still very usable in a sense. It's just the color degradation. By 204,800, it gets even worse. This is getting close to the brink of any usability at all, and 409,600 is the end limit for ISO. I would not go any higher ever. As you can see, 819,200 ISO. The image is falling apart terribly. At 1,638,400, it looks really bad. An iPhone is actually better at this point. And at 3,276,800, oh my God, this looks like sandpaper. So how does it compare to the D500 in low light? Well, here you go, the D5 versus the D500. Although the D5 seems a little bit soft, I don't know, maybe I missed focus, but let's concentrate on the low light only at this point. And as you can see side by side, anything below 1600 ISO, there's gonna be practically no difference at all. It's not until we get past 1600 and start making our way up to 3200 ISO where we can start to see a difference between the two cameras. And as you can see at 3200 ISO, there's small trace amounts of grain on the D500. For a crop sensor, it's doing very well, but it is no match for the D5. Moving along to 6400 ISO, you can see the noise grain on the D500 is still very well under control. By 12,800, you can see now that the D500 is showing more signs of grain and noise, and the D5 is showing practically none. At 25,600, there's no doubt that the D5 is superior in noise performance, as you can see from the video. Moving along to 51,200, this is about the brink of usability on the D500, whereas the D5 is just getting warmed up. By the time we move along to 102,400, you can see that's about it for the D500. These images are starting to look pretty rough. The D5 still looks fantastic. 204,800, the D500 for a crop sensor is holding up beautifully, but it is falling apart in comparison to the D5. The D5 is just a monster. At 409,600 ISO, the D500 is tapping out considerably, and the D5 is still on the edge of usability. At 819,200, both cameras are completely useless at this point, but the D5 still looks much better. At 1,638,400 ISO, they both look really bad. It's just a matter of which one looks worse, and in this case, it's the D500. Now, the D500 won't go to 3 million, and the D5 will, but it's just Nikon showing off because it looks like total poop. So moving along to the low light test in video, 4K 1.5 crop, you're going to notice anything below 12,800 ISO yields practically no noise at all. You're not going to really notice much traces of noise until over 12,800. As you can see, anything below is kind of a waste to test, but we did it anyway just to show you guys the difference between the different ISO levels. And as you can see, at 3200 ISO, there's no noise. The image looks fantastic. I was filming this in the flat profile, so there's so much room to color correct and to darken the shadows, which would in turn hide even more of the noise. So you really can shoot with the D5 all the way up to around 25,600 before worrying about any type of noise. As you can see, 12,800 looks fantastic. A little bit of dancing noise, and at 25,600, you can see a little bit more of it, but this is flat profile. We're going to be able to darken the shadows, so even at 25,600, the image looks fantastic. 51,200 is about the brink of usability for this camera, especially if you're doing weddings or events like that. You really do want to stay away from anything north of 51,000. At 102,400, you can see it's starting to soften up. The dynamic range is going down. We've got aberrations, and at 204,800, it's starting to look really bad. I would not recommend shooting this high ISO unless you're outside shooting surveillance type footage, or you're a stringer for news or whatnot. But ISO 409,000 looks really terrible. 819,000 looks even worse. I don't even know why the ISO range is allowed to be used in video, as it looks terrible, but it is available to show off with. At ISO 1,638,400, it looks even worse than 800,000 ISO did, of course. And at 3,276,800, there's no usable image here at all. It's just dancing sandpaper. Now, here comes a very interesting test. The D500 is a 1.5 crop sensor camera, and we're shooting 4K, and the D5 is in 1.5 crop mode for the 4K. So essentially, you'd be thinking that they would perform pretty much the same in low light, whereas this is not the case. As I said earlier in the video, the D5 can emulate the D500 in many ways by going into 1.5 crop mode, even in photo, but still performs better in low light. So if you're looking for a 1.5 crop camera to get in tighter shots, the D5 is still the better choice. Now, if you're looking at them side by side, by the time you get to 6400 ISO, you can see the noise dancing into the shadows on the D500, nothing on the D5 yet. By 12,800, you can see the trend continue. The D5 still looks much better. At 25,600, the D500 is at the brink of usability, whereas the D5 is still very usable. It's not until 51,200 that the D5 starts to show more noise and becomes slightly unusable, but you can still see clearly that the D5 is outperforming the D500. And by the time we get to 102,400, there's so much noise in the D500 and color degradation, the D5 still holds on much better. By 204,800, this is now a game of which one looks more terrible, and again, that's the D500. Moving along to 409,600 ISO, and again, the D500 looks worse, but the D5 still looks pretty darn bad. By the time we move along to 819,200 ISO, it's like the battle of the noise. Which one can make more noise? They are both an eyesore to look at. 1,638,400, the D500 is trying to show off its last ISO range, which looks absolutely terrible. The D5 is not far behind, and once again, the D5 showing off that it can do 3,276,800 ISO, and it's not doing a good job at all. So I did another test for you guys to compare 4K and 1.5 crop on the D5 to full frame HD 1080p, because I know a lot of you are going to be wondering, hey, is the HD better since it's full frame and we're not cropping in? Well, I did that test, and it's good that I did, because full frame mode is actually noticeably better in low light. However, as you can see from the images above, you're not going to see too much of a difference in ISO performance until you're above 12,800. In fact, it's right around 25,600 you start to see the most noticeable improvements with using full frame HD. So if the room is really dark, I suggest shooting in full frame HD. This way you get better low light performance. As you can see here at 25,600, there's dancing noise in the shadows on the 1.5 crop in 4K, but not in HD. 25,600, the full frame is still usable, whereas the 4K is starting to be at the edge of usability. At 102,400 ISO, I recommend using HD full frame, as it's sharper and less noise and still usable, but it is the edge of usability. By the time we get to 204,800 ISO, neither image is usable, but you could really push the HD full frame with noise reduction if you must. By 409,600 ISO, the 4K is just falling apart in comparison to the HD full frame, although the HD full frame is still unusable. 819,200 ISO, they both look terrible, but full frame is still better. When we get along here to 1.6 million, you can see that they're both very bad. At this point, it's hard to tell which one is better, as they're just both unusable and an eyesore beyond words. And by the time we get to 3 million ISO, it's the battle of noise and abstract art. Looks like sandpaper and blotches of paint everywhere. Very terrible. Now, in this next test, I wanted to show you guys that high ISO doesn't only just cause noise, but I wanted to show you the true effects of just raising the ISO. At 800 and 3200, you're not going to see any difference. So what I'm trying to show you, pay attention to the histogram. The exposure remains the same, but watch what the high ISO does. At 25,600, you're starting to see a change in the histogram. Do you see it yet? By 102,400, it's even more noticeable. Are you starting to notice what's happening to the histogram? If you haven't noticed yet, by the time we move along to 409,600, you will see the histogram is now just round bubbles. You're losing all kinds of detail and dynamic range. By the time we go to 3 million ISO, it's just a blob mess. So you can see dynamic range and sharpness and detail are affected by ISO and not just noise. The Nikon D5 does have electronic VR, only in full HD 1080p, of course, in full frame. However, as you can see, it's very good. It takes away most of the handshake, although it's not as good as VR on a lens, but the electronic VR is pretty amazing. If you look at the comparison side by side, you will see it makes a noticeable difference when doing handheld shots, so it's pretty cool that this camera has this built in. The Nikon D5 is truly an evolution from the D4 and the D4S. In fact, the only expense that Nikon has spared in this camera is 60p and 4K. However, this camera does so many other things that no other DSLR can do, like clean HDMI out up to 30 frames a second in 4K. It also has all its buttons backlit, so in the dark you can find your way around the camera. It also has 153 autofocusing points, more than any other DSLR. This truly is a monster. It'll do up to 3 million ISO, which is the highest ISO range, although not completely usable in the high end, is still more ISO range than any other DSLR. This truly is a beast. Up to 12 frames a second. You can use group function or 3D tracking. The camera is absolutely phenomenal. There is no other DSLR on the market today that can compete with the D5 in any way at all. And I haven't even mentioned the amazing and brilliant touchscreen on this camera. The Nikon D5 for photography and videography truly is the total package.
So the Nikon D5, is it really that much better than the D4S? Absolutely. What makes this camera so fantastic is the already great dynamic range, great features of the D4S, upgraded, better processing power. The X-Speed 5, 153 autofocusing points, 99 which are cross-type. Also the fact they fixed the issue with the video, and now you're getting 30 minutes of 4K recording, up to 30 frames a second using a 1.5 crop, which gives you accurate pixel density on 4K, which is hard to come by on a DSLR. About the same body size, 3,800 or 3,780 photos per one battery charge is fantastic. The ENEL 18A is flawless. The tracking is so superb and quick, you'll practically never miss a shot. It's everything the D500 is and then more. It's full frame, better in low light, just as good autofocusing capabilities and just as good video, but the fact is you get a full frame sensor. If you're looking to shoot video just on DSLRs, this is the Nikon to go for, especially if that's what you're shooting on. Is it better than the 1DX Mark II? I have no idea yet, but we're putting this head to head with the 1DX Mark II next Sunday, so stay tuned for that. So as you can see from the test, you see which camera is better in low light. You're not gonna get the full 3.2 million ISO on the D5, but anything over 409,000 is just Nikon showing off. It's still much better than the D4S that we tested in Times Square with Ray. Technology has come so far. It's got a touchscreen, It's like an iPhone. You can just swipe through and pinch to zoom. Checking focus was never so easy. This camera is absolutely amazing. I'm not gonna give this camera back to Nikon. NPS is gonna be very upset when I don't wanna return it. It's that damn good. It really, really, truly is. This is the camera that I would bank all my money on. The D500 is great if you're into sports and nature and stuff like that, but this is just as good, if not better, plus it's full frame. And you can set the crop to be 1.5 to be equivalent to the D500. So if you need all the features of the D500, but you're a wedding photographer and you want full frame, this will do everything the D500 will do and more. It can emulate the D500 with its 1.5 crop. You just hold the FN button down here, turn the rear dial, and you're at 1.5 crop. It's that simple. So guys, hopefully you enjoyed this review of the D5. Fantastic camera, amazing. 5-finger discount, just kidding. Good deal for the price. XQD slots are phenomenal, and they're fast. They work great, they really do. And like I said earlier in the video, I was just being facetious in the D500 video, talking crap about the XQD. I know technology's got to evolve, and they're doing a great job of it. The only thing that sucks if you're shooting on Canon and Nikon, which who would be doing that, but there are some, you're gonna have C-Fast and XQD, and CF, so, and SD. Don't forget to subscribe and to purchase any of the gear I review. Please support the channel. Keep the reviews coming and use the links down there in the information box to purchase any gear. It helps the channel out a lot, keeps the reviews coming. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter, facebook.com/famousmedia or famousmedia.com/blog. It'll be on the right-hand side of my website or on the left-hand side, newsletter on my Facebook page. All the newest information, rumors, new reviews coming. Please sign up. You'll get all the latest information and deals at B&H, Adorama, and of course, Amazon. Once again, subscribe. I'm Corey with Faymus Media, and happy shooting.